All right, good morning, everyone. My name is Jeff Pittman. I'm Chancellor of St. Louis Community College, and it's my extreme pleasure to welcome you to our 13th annual State of the St. Louis Workforce Report. This quickly became one of my favorite events each year that we do at St. Louis Community College. This is my 7th event, and this is the most exciting one that I've been involved with. And I just want to start out, I'll acknowledge several people before I step down here this morning, but I want to just mention 9PBS in making this event possible today. As you all know, we're still dealing with COVID. The Delta variant is surging in certain parts of the state, so we really appreciate us transitioning quickly from a live event, what was planned, to this virtual event. And I appreciate all of you being here today. Record attendance. We had over 800 registrations for this event today. That is by far the most. So we very much wish that we could be in person, but of course our first concern with everyone's safety. Well, I'm very, very excited about the great work that went into this year's report. I have two high-level observations. The first, as in past years, but even more so now, the report just reflects the high level of job vacancies and workforce needs that exist in the St. Louis region. There are thousands of open jobs right now, many of them in the middle skills arena. They pay fantastic wages, some of them as much as $70,000 and $80,000 a year. So we're very, very excited about the opportunity that presents for both employers and individuals wanting to get into the workforce. The second high-level observation I have about this report is that it presents a roadmap to inclusive economic recovery. I know that we talk a lot about inclusive recovery. Coming off this pandemic, this is incredibly important. And the panelists we have today are going to lend us some expertise on how we can make that happen. And I would want to direct all of you to page 43 of the report that talks about equal recovery, opportunity, and growth. This is a terrific section, and please make sure you take the time to read this. Well, the college is very well positioned to help address the workforce issues here in the St. Louis region. Just three main points. The first one I want to make about the college is access. We provide affordable, high-quality pathways to any individual that wants to get into the workforce to learn about a career or get trained or educated for a job. Many of them very, very high paid. And also, the pandemic, we know, left a lot of disadvantaged and particularly people of color and women behind that are behind now because of the issues associated with COVID-19 and getting into the workforce. So having an affordable option is there for any individual that wants it. The second is quality jobs. There are just a lot of quality jobs in the St. Louis region right now that are available. The college has its programs aligned well with what the workforce needs are, and again, are very, very affordable pathways. And then finally is partnership. The third point I want to is partnership. We wish to partner with any group or individuals that want to assist us in creating these affordable pathways into the workforce to help ease the many job openings that are in place right now in St. Louis. And I like the one concept of a workforce collaborative that was presented in the section that I described earlier. And I really appreciate the efforts of many groups coming together right now to assist with workforce development. In particular, I've been working closely with Greater St. Louis, Inc. and the Regional Business Council, as Greater St. Louis Incorporated has developed the 2030 Jobs Plan, and the Regional Business Council has actually put together a website to assist linking individuals to jobs. Well, many special thanks to our partners. This year, the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis wrote the narrative of the section for this year's report, Equitable Recovery, Opportunity, and Growth. The Fed's Institute for Economic Equity opened its doors in 2021 under William Rogers III as Vice President and the inaugural director. I also want to thank our other workforce partners, including the Missouri Economic Research and Information Center, or MERIC, who produce all of the economic data that you see in the report, the Missouri Chamber of Commerce and Industry, and certainly locally our Regional Business Council. Finally, I want to introduce one of our longest standing and closest partners with this effort and this event, the St. Louis Business Journal, led by market president and publisher, Robert Bobrow. Bob?
Thank you, Dr. Pittman. Appreciate the opportunity to join you all today, and also would like to thank Amy and 9 PBS for hosting today's event. St. Louis Business Journal is proud to have partnered with St. Louis Community College for over a decade to help bring their annual workforce report to our region. This report contains critical information that local businesses need to stay ahead of the curve. Now, we've all been seeing a lot in the news recently about workforce. Now more than ever, workforce and workforce development matters. Cities with a thriving workforce and organizations dedicated to workforce development like St. Louis Community College attract and retain businesses. Excuse me. Without a doubt, workforce development practitioners are pivoting right now and will need to continue to do so. After this crisis is over, new models will need to be developed, and we're going to see lasting changes in this area. But reports like this and organizations like St. Louis Community College will be instrumental in making sure St. Louis stays relevant. Now, before I close out my remarks, excuse me, this morning, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that this week's issue of the St. Louis Business Journal will be a special one and will look a little bit different. And that's because we're going to have a very special cover wrap sponsored by St. Louis Community College. So, Dr. Pittman, thank you again for giving myself and the St. Louis Business Journal an opportunity to partner with you on this important project, and thanks for all you do for our region. And now it's my great pleasure to introduce to the podium Amy Shaw, President and CEO of 9 PBS. Amy?
Thank you so much, Robert. Thank you. Thank you so much, Robert. It's a pleasure to be here today, and I'm really honored to welcome all of you virtually to the studios of 9 PBS. I should mention that as if 2021 weren't busy enough, at the beginning of 2021, we rebranded. We went from 9 Network to 9 PBS, and we did that very intentionally. Many of you have known us as Channel 9, as KETC, and as 9 Network, and what we wanted to do was really bring the trusted local brand of 9, connected it to the trusted national brand of PBS. PBS has been voted for the last 18 years the most trusted brand in the United States, and we're very proud to combine those assets together. This marks the 4th year of our partnership to deliver this important report, and I'm happy to talk with you about our work in workforce development today. We're all going through something extraordinary right now. That cannot be denied. We thought we would be together in person today. It's just a very different time. We know that it's testing our limits, this pandemic, the length, the uncertainties, but it's also made very clear how we need to adapt and evolve and how we need to come together and think and act collectively. And during the pandemic, that's exactly what 9 PBS has been doing with our trusted network of partners. We have been thinking and acting collectively, working to meet the needs of our community, working on relationships, our trusted partners, and we're trying to understand the rapidly changing nature of our community right now. And over the last year and a half plus, some extraordinary things have happened. In just 1 month, the month of April 2020, we launched an on-air classroom for all of those children learning virtually. In that time, over the last year plus, we've aired over 1,000 episodes of Teaching in Room 9, our on-air classroom. We've achieved close to 3 million impressions during that time, which has been extraordinary. My husband did the math on that, and it's something like close to 3,000 children who would be impacted by every single lesson that we teach. That's extraordinary. We also launched a family and educator toolkit, which was online and then also delivered in person with 6,000 PBS Playtime pads, which are cell-enabled tablet devices that enable kids without Wi-Fi to be able to learn through digital tools. We also found new ways to continue to produce and distribute great content and share the stories that our community needed to hear. And we're also the #1 rated PBS station in the country. Thank you to St. Louis for making that happen. That was for all of calendar 2021 and also thus far in 2021. So the reason we're here today is to talk about workforce, and our role in that Beyond Our Studio is our work on Pathways to Work. It's an initiative that was formerly known as American Graduate. It engages a network of trusted partners who come together, like St. Louis Community College, to combine our resources so that we can make clear the pathways to work, the pathways that are career development and life changers for young people in our community, and also those people who are mid-career changing. And we know that that's happened a lot with COVID. And especially we're looking in reskilling areas of manufacturing, construction, healthcare, and IT. And this year, our expanded work is including the Regional Youth Employment Coalition, which we're very proud to lead. It's a coalition with a network of partners. We're honored to lead that because we know that our young people need to find those pathways in order to continue to grow St. Louis and strengthen St. Louis. It's our community engagement model at 9 PBS that really drives all of this work, which is pretty simple. It's understand what's important to the community through the people that know it best. It's create and distribute content at scale to help people understand those issues, not only the people that are impacted, but the entire community, because we're in this together. And then we measure that content to understand, did it incent people to be more aware, to understand, and to act? And finally, we lather, rinse, and repeat. We start all over and keep doing it. Throughout the last 18 months, our workforce partners have come together to share their journey. And they've discussed their hopes and their fears, and as the pandemic took its toll on all of us, some of those themes are the possibility of a K-shaped recovery, the rise of a permanent remote workforce, the disproportionate impact of the pandemic on young people, people of color, and women, and the ongoing need for more people to enter high-demand skilled career pathways. What we've learned has been translated into content, the stories that we tell, and the stories that move us and our community to know and do better. The goals of the initiative have been shaped by the two greatest challenges in our community, and by the challenges our workforce partners face. That's diversifying talent pipelines, and that's also bringing awareness to and the positive perceptions of high-demand skilled careers. And those are those jobs that do require training post-high school, but not necessarily a college degree right now. Though our content looks different this year, doesn't everything, we've continued to create local content that incorporates all of what we're learning from our network of partners and learning from the community. In 2020, 9 PBS's workforce content was viewed hundreds of thousands of times, and our teen audience for our workforce development content has grown. From 2019 to 2020, teen viewers increased by 29%, and Black teen viewers increased by 75%, and that comes to us from Nielsen studies. You'll also see in the following piece that despite the barriers posed by the pandemic, our producers continue to tell relevant, thought-provoking stories, and stories that move us. Please roll the video.
Eugene Stubblefield is really happy with life.
I was going to see somebody. They weren't there. And a lady just came out and was just like, before you go, I know this good program and you never know. She was like, just give it a try.
She handed him a flyer, and on it was information about Mission St. Louis, a local workforce development program. But for Eugene, it was the key to a fresh start. That piece of paper and the one for a new beginning led him to Jason Watson. He's the executive director, and while the group's mission started with education, it would transform into something much bigger.
What we realized is that if we really wanted to impact kids, we needed to impact the entire family. We began to build relationships with those students. We started to build relationships with the parents, which then led to what's now called our Beyond Jobs program, which focuses on workforce development.
So far, Mission STL has helped more than 500 people get jobs. But for Watson, it's less about handing people a job application and more about treating people as people?
I met Eugene, man. Yeah, it's been about 4 years, and it's interesting because Eugene has always been just a solid dude. Like some people you meet, and it's just an instant vibe and energy. You could tell by the time that he had made it to us, he had different situations that had taken place in his life and brought him to a certain point.
So, what brought Eugene to Mission STL? Well, like anyone, he says he has his own story.
You know, I was going through personal and legal and family situations, and I wasn't being responsible enough to step up to the plate and live a life that was deserving.
Eugene now has a job at a paper company.
If I could just go back 5 years and just tell myself that day, I would say, man, aren't you glad you didn't put that piece of paper down? That's the first thing I could look at him and say, like, glad you ain't put that piece of paper down, aren't you? And I look right back at him and say, you better know it.
And living is what he plans to do.
I'm alive, but I want to live too. I love that I got a purpose now. You know what I'm saying?
A purpose he credits to his friend, Jason. Now he wants to look out for others. And if he could share any bit of advice, he'd say this.
And I hope that I can be an inspiration for some of my guys who's still going through things and who's still in the neighborhoods and who's still struggling and trying to find a way. If they see this, here I go. Whenever they need me, and I'm giving them my word that every day I give the best that I can to be that example that they knew I could be.
For Living St. Louis, I'm Gabrielle Hayes.
I think we can see what the power of a job does for individuals and community members and the entire community. Thank you to Mission St. Louis and to our entire partner network through Pathways to Work. We're so proud to lead that initiative and to be part of this important work. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Charles Gaskin from the regional economist of the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let's see here. There we go. Just to get started, these are my own views. They're not necessarily the views of the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis or the Federal Reserve System. What I'm hoping to do today is just to provide a really kind of a lay of the land as to where we are today in the economy and where the St. Louis economy has gotten to with sense of the recovery from the pandemic, and kind of where we're still lingering, and also some of the structural challenges that we're going to have ahead as we move forward in this economy. I'm going to take it in 3 parts. So I'm going to start with a national economic overview, switch to the regional economic overview, and then move into talking about adapting to some of the future trends that we have in the economy that we have to be thinking about. So starting off with a national economic overview, I think the easiest place to really think about this is with total economic output for the U.S. economy, which we measure by real GDP growth. And what I have in this chart is just the trend in total U.S. economic output since about 2008. And you can see the last recession in 2008, 2009, followed by a long recovery for about 10 years, and then the pandemic. The thing that I really want to emphasize here is that this recession in 2020 was the deepest recession that we've had in post-World War II record. And then at the same time, we saw a full recovery in U.S. output in just about a year. So in the second quarter of 2021, output was actually at a higher level than it was before the pandemic. In 2008 and 2009, this process took about 2.5 years. So we're well ahead of the last recovery, and we're actually in a place right now where the economy is actually expanding. On the other side of the coin, when you look at the labor market, we're still well behind where we want to be with respect to a full labor market recovery. So about 5.7 million jobs behind the peak before the pandemic started. That's a stark improvement from the 22 million jobs that were lost, at the depths of this recession. And again, still well ahead of where we were during this labor market recovery back in 2008, 2009. So this has been a steep shock to the U.S. economy, a steep shock to the regional economy, followed by what appears to be, at this point, a really strong economic rebound. However, it does present some real structural challenges as we kind of adapt to this new environment here. The first thing that we want to mention, and I think it's already come up in these conversations, is there are a lot of job openings in the economy right now. And there's actually more job openings today than we have the number of unemployed workers in the economy. So this is relating to a lot of firms reporting worker shortages across the spectrum, from the hospitality sector that's been hit really hard, to manufacturers, to professional business services and IT occupations as well. So across the entire spectrum of the labor market, we're seeing record job openings and an unemployment rate that's actually quite low. And I'll dive into exactly what it is that's keeping people out of the unemployment rolls right now and keeping these shortages around. So to start with, this chart is showing the employment to population ratio for men and for women. So this is the share of the population that's actively working. And what you can see, first of all, is there's clearly a gender gap in the employment to population ratio that's persisted since, before this series even started. That gap's closed over the last decades. However, as you can see from the pandemic, there was a steep shock. It hit both men and women really hard, but it happened to hit women in the labor market even further. And the recovery's been a bit slower in that. And at one point, you actually had less than half of women employed in the U.S. economy. People are returning to work, but at a slower rate. We still have a long way to go to get back up to where we were pre-pandemic, where about 77% of men and about 56–60% of women were fully employed in the labor market. Flipping to another dimension here is if we look at the differences by race, we see a similar trend, which is there's a gap between employment to population ratios for white and black or African American workers, and that it's closed over time, and it was actually at its narrowest point right before this pandemic, so only about a 2 percentage point gap. It's widened pretty dramatically as a result of this recession, and I think one point that I'd really like everybody to take away from this chart is that prolonged economic expansions have helped Black and African American population significantly more than the white population, as the jobs that they're in are very cyclical, and it takes a long time for the labor market to get to a point where we're able to really bring people back in from the sidelines and into jobs. And so prolonged economic expansions are very, very important for closing some of these gaps that we see in society. One real challenge that we're having looking forward is this demographic curve that we're facing, which you can see from this chart, which is showing the participation rate both for the nation as well as for the state of Missouri. Back in 2000, about 71% of the population was in the labor force, either looking for work or actively employed. And due to the demographic shifts that we've seen over the last couple of decades, this has dropped down now to, in some cases, around 60%. In some states, even well below this. We had about 2 million people that have retired as a result of the pandemic. And this is coming from two parts. One, we have, significant stock market gains, and we have a wealth effect that's allowed people to feel comfortable retiring. There's the health effects, and then you have the life expectancy, which has dropped as a result of the pandemic as well. So this is likely to recover a little bit, but there are going to be some long-term challenges in getting this labor force participation rate back up. So we have to, when we're thinking about the workforce going forward, we have to be realizing that there are constraints that are in place and that we don't have the demographic profile that's going to expand the labor force in the same way that it has over previous economic expansions. What does this all mean kind of from a monetary policy standpoint? And something that's been in the headlines a lot right now is that we have strong demand, output is very strong, labor supply is constrained, supply chain shortages are persisting across the economy, from plastics and semiconductors or things that we're hearing about regularly. And as a result of this, we've seen a pretty substantial spike in inflation over the last couple of months. This is expected to persist, into the future, probably at least until the end of this year, as these shortages have to work their way out of the system, and we can get materials back on shelves for people to buy and get those price pressures back down. So inflation is definitely a concern right now, and that erodes people's savings. So just like we have jobs that are really important for people to generate income, we have people who are retiring, we have people who have money in the bank that they're trying to save. and inflation does erode this savings. So this is definitely a serious concern that we have to keep in mind and balance out when we think about the dynamics that are happening in the labor force. So turning locally, I just want to make a couple key points here. So first of all, when we look at kind of the economic rebound in the St. Louis metropolitan area, overall, the employment drop was relatively comparable to the nation, but not as severe. We saw a quicker economic recovery, and job growth kind of picked back up a little bit faster than the national average throughout 2020. But it's generally stabilized and kind of stalled out in the last couple of months, and even in the last year. So we have hit this point in which we really need to get to the next level, and we need to get the pandemic again under control so that people can go back to work and feel comfortable getting their kids into school and re-entering the labor force. So we have stalled out on that standpoint. The other part that I want to note is the unemployment rate is lower here in the St. Louis metropolitan area than it is on the national level. And what that means is that although the demand for jobs is still relatively high, the unemployment rate is low because people have dropped out of the labor force and they're not actively looking for work. So that presents additional challenges for employers as they think about how they want to move forward and find these jobs. Right now, the shortfall relative to the 2019 peak is about 75,000 jobs in the St. Louis economy. Current labor supply, based on unemployed people, those that are unemployed on temporary layoffs, or those who have dropped out of the labor force and are willing to take a job, they only account for about 3/4 of the shortfall. So there's still that, like I said, many retirees and many other people have dropped out of the labor force for other reasons, and those people need to come back in off the sidelines and find ways to re-engage with the labor market, and they're going to need assistance to do that and pass forward. If we're going to make up this 75,000 shortfall, because right now we just don't have the supply of workers or potential workers to meet that need. This is just to reemphasize the point about the unemployment rate. You can see that the labor force in the St. Louis metropolitan area is about 2.5% below where it was in 2020, January 2020, and it hasn't recovered at the same rate as the national average has. There was kind of some blips and spikes in here, but we're kind of at this point at a relatively lower trend. So we really want to see these numbers move back up. I'm going to move to some model-based forecasts, and I think the important caveat with all these forecasts that I'm going to show is they're not a crystal ball. They're a numerical model. So they're basically taking the trends that we've seen over history, trying to move them forward based on the levers that we understand that operate in the economy. So this is not to say that this is where we're going to be. As with every forecast, it's probably going to be wrong, but it does present, I think, a very important baseline for thinking about the labor force challenges that we have going forward. So the two dimensions that I have here is the population that's 25 to 54, which is really the prime age population in the U.S. economy. Those are the people that are most likely to be working. And the data that we have for the state and for the St. Louis metropolitan area suggests that due to demographics and slow growth on the low end and more people on the 50 to 54 range, we're going to see slower population growth of those prime age workers and actually a decline in prime age worker population here in the St. Louis metropolitan area. And as a result of that, it's going to translate into slower labor force growth as well within this region. So this presents a structural challenge that we see across the entire U.S. economy, but that's really exacerbated here in the broader Midwest and in the St. Louis metropolitan area. So when you put this together into a forecast, this is what it looks like. You're expected to see a full employment recovery by 2022. And most of these gains are going to be coming from kind of outlying counties from the core parts of our region, with employment declines expected in St. Louis County and St. Louis City. But overall, between 2019 and 2025, really it's flat growth. So it's basically a rebound, but not a lot of expansion projected based on the trends that we see for demand for labor and then just the supply of labor that we have going forward. And you can see this in the chart, which is basically from 2022 onward, employment growth is stagnant at this point. Again, this is not a crystal ball. This is a statistical model, but this is kind of the path that we have forward, and this is the curve that we really need to bend, and that's where I think a lot of the initiatives that we're talking about really come into play. So adapting to future trends, just want to make a couple key points here and echoing some of the points that I've already made. So first of all, if we zoom back out, the St. Louis economy follows the national cycle. If the U.S. economy is doing well, the St. Louis economy is going to be doing well, and we're going to see gains. However, it's this long, prolonged expansion that we see from the 10-year period. This is where the demographic trends come into play. And what you saw from this pandemic is the St. Louis economy was hit very hard. It's recovering quite quickly, but it's really the period going forward over the next 5 to 10 years that we have to address these structural issues, because that's what's really leading to the shortfall. It's not these shocks that we see from the economy itself. So what are some of the strategies we want to think about for a slow growth environment that we're facing today? Well, first of all, population growth is critical. It's really a sign of economic prosperity for the region. So it means that we have the amenities here and the features in this region that people want to live here. That being said, we have to be careful in that we don't want to grow population at all costs because that can also raise costs for the existing population. So what we want to be thinking about is how do we raise incomes for our existing population? How do we increase employment rates for existing population and generate that prosperity that then people from outside of the region, they can see and say, this is a good place to work. And then we can get that sustained population growth that we can actually manage in a way that the existing population doesn't feel like they're displaced. One way to do this is investing in our local population through entrepreneurship, which will grow the labor force, incomes, and demand in a sustainable manner. Increasing job and business density is also a really key attribute to this because it improves access to jobs and it can create productivity gains, particularly in the environment we are now where high-skilled workers are able to work remotely. The locations of their firms may not matter within the geographic area of the St. Louis metro area, but for those that have to be on site to do their jobs, we still have to make sure that they have access to reliable transportation and that they can find affordable housing in close proximity to work so that they can actually take the shifts that need to be taken. So job and business density is very important for growing the region from that standpoint. Expanding the labor force is not going to come from the demographics. It also isn't coming from immigration. We've seen a slowdown in immigration. So finding people that are on the sidelines and bringing them back in is really the key lever at this point for expanding the labor force in the St. Louis metropolitan area. Telework is creating this disconnect, like I said, between the location of jobs and households, particularly for upper income workers. So this idea of relocating companies and enticing businesses to move in this region, it can stimulate migration if it's successful, but we might also end up creating jobs in other parts of the country with firms located here. And it has this burden on the existing population of the cost of recruitment, as well as the increases in housing values in areas where it could displace population as well. So a renewed focus on what is it that households need? What is the household decision-making process? That's going to be key for bringing in the population, retaining the population, and then skilling them up to fill those jobs so that the businesses that are coming in can hire locally and grow from that standpoint. And then the last point I want to make is going forward, we think about the 2040 census. The population for the 2040 census, when we do these next sets of projections out, they're between the ages of 5 and 34 right now. That's really the key group of people that we have to be thinking about that are going to be adding jobs and adding to the labor force in 5 to 10 to 15 years in the future. And if we don't have economic opportunities and these young people are not trained to the level that they need to be at, they will look elsewhere and move to other parts of the country for work. So retaining this population and training them so that they can take jobs in the St. Louis area is really key for the future here. So it's great to see that our universities and our educators are really working hard on these key attributes. So with that, I'll turn it over to Hart, who will follow up on some of the real details of this report. So looking forward to it.
Thanks, Chuck. Really appreciate it. It's always great to partner with the Fed. You've been wonderful partners in this initiative for many years. Good morning, everyone. My name is Hart Nelson. I'm the Associate Vice Chancellor for Workforce Solutions at St. Louis Community College. It's my great pleasure now to present to you our 13th annual State of St. Louis survey to employers. And really excited to share with you some of the findings that we have from this survey. I do want to just kind of hit a couple of the points that Chuck raised here, just kind of foot stomp them a little bit. This is just showing another chart of the recovery. And you can see that, again, it's gone from what we would consider probably a full employment economy back in March, all the way through the pandemic, levels that we hadn't seen since the Great Depression, and then back to now more of a recovery slope. But we know that it's not the same for everyone. You can see the unemployment rates here varying by age and by sex. We also know, as Chuck pointed out, that these vary greatly by race. Not everyone has recovered equally, and that's exactly what we're here to talk about today with our panel as well. So I hope you'll stick around for that conversation. We have seen some industry strengths, and especially when we take a look at the clusters over the last decade in our region, you see some great growth, obviously, in healthcare, over 20%. Growth, if you look towards the bottom, in transportation. We've seen growth in other industries such as manufacturing. Some traditional strengths in our region. And you do see some small growth in places like leisure and hospitality, which we'll be interested to see after the pandemic ends what those structural changes might look like. So we really have had some good growth, but as Chuck said, we are in a slow growth period and we have to be able to adjust to that. He also talked about the demographics, and this is one where we really need to be thinking about what our future is going to look like. Here in St. Louis, we have about 24%, almost a quarter of the population that's 55 and older. Chuck talked about that quite a bit. You have people who are retiring, who feel comfortable enough to retire now, and they're going to do so. But coming up behind, as he mentioned, we have a much smaller K-12 generation. The younger people, we just don't have enough younger people able to fill the jobs that we have available right now. And that's going to last for a period of time. We're not alone. This is a national trend, but it matters since we aren't seeing the levels of immigration and population growth that we're seeing in other parts of the country, especially our peers. And it's something that we need to focus on. So I work for a college, which means education is obviously very important to what we do. And we can see here in terms of educational attainment for our region that St. Louis, as an urban area, trends a bit above both the U.S. and Missouri in terms of our educational attainment. You can see that at all levels. Our graduate or professional degrees, bachelor's degrees are higher, associate degrees, as well as even those who have some college, no degree. Obviously, then we trend lower when we have high school diploma and less. So why does that matter? Well, this is a little older data. This is from 2019, but it's a chart we've been using for a period of time. It's because education matters. It pays. You can see here from the table on the right side that median earnings increase as you move up in education. So there's a big bump, or a somewhat moderate jump from when you get your high school diploma. Same thing when you get to some college or an associate degree, and obviously an even larger jump when you get to that bachelor's degree or higher. But it's the left side of this table that I think is as interesting. You take a look at a declining unemployment rate for folks as they increase in education. Really what this is saying is that if you don't have even a high school diploma, but if you don't have more education, you're going to be the first person out the door when crisis hits or when there's a pandemic or an economic disruption, and many times you'll be the last person back in. Education after high school provides that stability. So in addition to lifetime earnings, you're also going to have a more stable workplace, and that's something that we believe is important. So now I want to turn to the results of our survey itself. The methodology that we used for our survey, it is a live telephone interview, so it's not an online interview that people are self-selecting. It is employers across the St. Louis metropolitan statistical area. Each interview takes, as you can see here, about 23 minutes. There are multiple questions. Many of them have multiple parts. It takes a while. And this is an all-industry survey this year. So what I mean by that is we keep calling companies and getting completed surveys until we have enough of them in a particular industry so that we have the same percentage as found in our economy. So you can see here on the left side, there are a series of NAICS codes. It's a North American Industry Classification System, very technical term that I'm finally learning how to say. But you can see the category. The key there is we make sure that we survey the same number of businesses again that we will find and get those completed surveys that we're going to find in our economy. It also is, as I said, a full MSA survey. So even though we are St. Louis Community College and we are looking at St. Louis City and County, and that's who we represent and that's who we serve primarily, we actually interview employers from across the MSA. And the reason is simple. These are where our graduates are going to work, It's where people are commuting to or from to go to our college or to go to other work in our area. This is our commuting area. And so it's important to make sure that we talk to employers across this region. And you can see from the scatter map there where they were. The survey primarily hits small and mid-sized businesses. And that's not just because we're looking to target them, it's because that's who the employers are in our region. You can see here that about 80% of the employers that we surveyed have less than 50 employees. So then, therefore, about 20% of them have more than 50. So again, it's primarily a small and mid-sized business survey. We'll talk about that in a couple of slides ahead. So now let's get to the results. What did our employers say when we spoke with them? The big thing we always ask is a look back on the last 12 months, and then we do a look ahead for the next 12 months. Asking our employers, what did you hire? Did you add to your workforce? What did you do over the last 12 months? Well, the pandemic obviously had an effect. You can see here from this chart that 31% of employers cut employees over the last 12 months. And quite a few of them did it significantly. In fact, 7 times the rate that we saw back in 2019, again, our last pre-pandemic year. So really a lot of job cuts across our employers that we surveyed. A few less on the decreased slightly category, but those, obviously you can see, probably went to the decreased significantly category. But having said that, we still found companies that found reasons to hire. They were still growing into the pandemic. About a quarter of companies continue to hire, and you can see we actually had a slightly increased number of those, a slightly higher percentage of those who increased their hiring significantly over the last 12 months. So now let's talk about taking a look ahead. So the key thing here, 63% of companies say they plan on hiring in the next 12 months, which is phenomenal. Now I will caveat this. You always see more optimism from employers in the 12 months ahead than you do when you ask them what actually happened. So you can see that back in 2020, only about 4% of employers thought they were going to decrease. I'll remind you, it was above 30%. So always see more optimism, but there's still some value in comparing apples to apples here. You see a much larger percentage of employers saying they're going to increase their hiring significantly, even more so than in 2019, when we were in a great booming economy, pre-pandemic. You can see it's more than 3 times the rate. So this matters. We also then, though, ask employers, are you seeing a shortage of applicants? Are you having problems finding people to hire? Well, no surprise. You heard this from pretty much everyone today, and from Chuck saying there's more jobs open than there are people looking for work. Well, 2/3 of the employers say that they're having a problem finding skilled applicants. And this is twice the rate that we saw back in 2019. Again, a full employment economy where our unemployment rate was in the 3s, and still people were having a hard time, or it's having a much harder time now finding applicants. And we're going to see that play out in the next slides as well. We ask employers about their barriers to growth. What's keeping your company from growing? We often, in fact, this has been the number one for years, is a shortage of workers with the knowledge or skills that they need to do the job. You can see a huge increase over last year here, 58% of employers with that challenge. However, we also saw large increases in the next categories. Economic conditions jumped almost 20%. The government policies and regulations jumped over 20%. So we're seeing these pop up again. Now those two may be related to the 4th category here, which was a 4th highest response, or most common response, which is general COVID-related issues. And there may be some combination, since COVID-related issues often transfer over to government policies and regulations or the effect on the economy. But still taking a look that when asked a specific COVID question, it ranked 4th on employers' concerns. Childcare access jumped up this year, and we've been seeing a lot of stories about this and hearing quite a bit about it, and that is an important thing that we'll continue to monitor. So we hadn't seen that change last year, despite the pandemic. This year, obviously, we're seeing some response there. In addition to asking employers, like basically how many of them or what percentage are worried about these concerns, we also ask them to rate how important are each of these concerns to you and to your business. And you see here a slight change. The most employers responded with shortage of workers with knowledge or skills, but it was more important to employers of government policies and regulations. Now, we are a pretty highly regulated region. We have a lot of healthcare providers, we have a lot of financial services industries, and so we've generally seen this to be a pretty high response. But you can see it is an increase over last year's results as well. Number 2, of course, coming in with shortage of workers with knowledge or skills. We ask employers as well, how are you going to add workers? If you're hiring, what are the methods that you're going to use to add workers? Astronomical level, huge percent, 80% of employers said they're going to hire full-time employees. That was great to see. Again, showing strong confidence. They're going to hire. Employers are going to ready to hire, but they want to hire full-time. And you can see this is over a 15% jump from last year. What's interesting about this is what at least I learned in business school, that a lot of the traditional risk mitigation factors, so things like hiring contractors, hiring temporary workers, those came back this year from where they were in our results last year, but they're really no higher than they were in pre-pandemic times, despite the fact that we have a lot of uncertainty and a lot of risk in our economic environment right now. They're just really not interested. Same thing happened with part-time employees. Whereas last year's results, employers weren't looking at part-time employees, perhaps because they were harder to onboard when people were working more remotely. That came back to normal levels. But again, some of those traditional risk mitigation factors aren't happening. Instead, employers are saying, we want full-time employees. So we know that employers are saying we're having a hard time finding people that have the skills that we need. Shortage of workers with knowledge or skills are a problem. So we ask them then, what measures are you taking? What are you doing to address those skill shortages? And we see some significant change here as well. The most common answer that we get, and it has been for many years, is they're hiring less experienced people and training them. On-the-job training. Very common. We'll see another slide about that in a bit. But this was a huge change this year in the number of employers that are offering increased wages. That is a 20% change, actually 24% change here, significant increase, and we're seeing the results of that and we're seeing reporting on it in higher wages across all industries. Not sure if I'm not the economist Chuck is, so it may be an inflationary pressure as well, but we're seeing really change there. The other one that obviously stands out here is where we're hiring from. And really seeing that the employers are looking to hire from outside the St. Louis region because they can't find the employees that they need here. Now again, we're going to have a big conversation of maybe they're not looking in the right places, and I think that's an important point that folks have made that spoke before me as well. One other interesting piece on this chart, or actually two. First one is about automation. If you have so many employers saying that they can't find employees, again, business school, maybe everything I learned there was wrong, would tell you that they would start investing in automation. They're going to look for, I'm going to replace people that I can't find with some sort of automation, whether that's robots, whether that's automated systems. And we're not seeing that. In fact, it decreased this year compared to last year. And that was an interesting result that we're going to continue to track. The other thing, as was seen, and Chuck mentioned that about immigration, not seeing an increase in trying to hire from outside the United States, which I think is a particular challenge for St. Louis. With low population growth, the demographics that we have, I think that immigration is really going to be key to success here, and I'm hoping that we can move that direction in the future. One of the questions that we asked in many years past, we didn't last year, I'm glad we have it back this year, is asking employers, what shortcomings are you seeing in your applicants? As it has been for many years, the top response was poor work habit, poor work ethic, basically people not showing up for work. But what's interesting then is taking a look at the next most common results. You see here lack of general business knowledge, critical thinking, communication and interpersonal skills, thinking creatively. These are all those soft skills, power skills. You'd have to get down to number 6 before employers are saying we're not seeing the technical skills that we need specific to this job. Huge focus that we have on STEM and STEAM education, and it's appropriate. We know that the jobs need that. But employers are starting off saying what we're not seeing are those interpersonal skills, those power skills, and they're important to us. That's something that we need to be paying attention to. When you take a look here, this is just another way of showing that. And then the importance of those. Again, this is a year-to-year comparison compared to 2019. You can see that employers are saying that, in fact, the only thing that grew was poor work habits. That grew in importance. This is on a 5-point scale. I don't believe I explained that before. 5 being most important, 1 being least important for employers. So you see that poor work habits is actually more important this year than it was in 2019, and the other categories seem to be less important than in the last survey, slightly. I'm going to talk a bit about skill levels and jobs in various skill levels here, so I want to make sure that I define that. What we define as a high-skilled job is one that requires a 4-year degree or above. A low-skill job is one that requires a high school diploma or less, And a middle skill job is something that requires more than a high school diploma, but less than a 4-year degree. So something like an associate degree, certificate of proficiency or specialization, accelerated training, which is what my department does, so the kinds of things that a community college may provide, as well as other training partners. And so just to give you an example, so what are some of these jobs? This is a poll of the online job ads over the last 12 months in the St. Louis region for some middle skilled jobs. It probably comes as no surprise to many of you that registered nurses is in huge demand. You can see there were over 21,000 job postings last year for nurses. There are, I believe, at this point, over 2,000 open jobs in the St. Louis region for registered nurses. Huge demand. And you can see a number of other healthcare-related fields in this middle skill jobs. Nursing assistants, medical assistants, LPNs, licensed practical nurses, huge demand in that space. All of which can be, you can get the skills for that in less than 4 years. Another one, number 2, we keep hearing that truck driving is dead, that trucks are going to be automated. Well, it's not going to happen for a while still. Number 2 on this list, you can get your commercial driver's license in 3 to 5 weeks, and you can see over 10,000 job ads in the last year. The other skills that you see here, maintenance and repair workers, production workers, and so you're seeing some of that manufacturing as well in the middle skill space. We ask employers in our survey, what skill levels do they have? What are they looking for? Again, based on that low, middle, and high. And in years past, you can see the majority of employers were saying that they had a focus in the middle skill space. This year, for the first time, we're seeing that there's a slightly higher percentage in low skill. And that very well may be because of the impact that we've seen in the hospitality and leisure sector. You can't go into a restaurant or a hotel, at least, and I just traveled across quite a bit of the country, and it's everywhere, that they're looking for help, that they've got signs up. And it may be because many of those positions may not require specialized skills, that's one of the indicators here. So we'll take a look at that and continue watching it. We're also taking a look at some of our data tools, such as JobsEQ and Burning Glass and others. Really, what are the skills that employers are looking for? We've seen a shift over the last few years, really, in what is considered a basic skill. And if you can see on the left side of this slide, down near the bottom, Microsoft Office, Microsoft Excel, computer literacy. A few years ago, these used to be specialized skills, or possibly even software skills when it comes to Microsoft Excel. And now they're not. They are required for just most jobs. They are truly a basic skill. Even something like Microsoft Excel, which we don't really see as being the software itself, it's really a definition of numeracy. It's making sure that someone is comfortable with manipulating data and understanding data. Again, looking over at the specialized skills, as I mentioned earlier, customer service is at the top. You see sales, patient care, customer contact. A lot of these interpersonal skills are in high demand. And then over in certificates, you can see registered nurse, second on the list, commercial driver's license, same thing that we talked about for middle skills. We ask employers in our survey, so if you aren't seeing, or how are you providing really the skills that you need in the jobs that you have? So if someone comes to you and doesn't quite have the skills they need, or you have existing employees and you're trying to train them, what methods are you using? Well, unsurprisingly, on-the-job training, which has always been our highest response, continues to be there. Employers train people once they get in the door, and they have done that forever, and they're going to continue to do that. We did see some reversions to the norm this year, things like the flexible schedules, where that dropped off in the pandemic. People kind of hungered down a bit. In-house classroom training, unsurprisingly, at the beginning of the pandemic, when people were kind of sent home, wasn't a popular option. Seems to be returning to the normal here. So on-the-job training remains number 1, but we're seeing some kind of return to normal for these. One of the other things that we talk about is we take a look at 7 job categories. And these are job categories that are of particular importance to a community college like ours. They're middle skill jobs. So you can see here those categories: skilled trades, patient care, manufacturing, maintenance, and so on. We ask them, the employers, do you employ people with these job categories and these skills? And if so, are you having a problem finding them? Is there a shortage of those workers? Well, you can see here in skilled trades, almost 3/4 of employers are having difficulty finding skilled tradesmen. Patient care tech, unsurprisingly during a pandemic, 2/3 of employers are having a hard time finding patient care employees. You also see that over half of the employees with manufacturing and maintenance employees are having a hard time, and so on. The one here that's interesting, I think, again, no surprises, we've seen these trends, but looking over towards the right side under information technology, we hear all kinds of conversations about how it's difficult to find IT workers. And it is, about how many open IT jobs for software developers and IT professionals there are, which there are. You can go out and see them. But surprisingly, only 27% of the employers who said that they employ people in the information technology field are having a hard time finding those individuals. So something that we saw a drop last year, it's kind of reverted back to the norm again this year, something we're going to continue to track, because it just doesn't make sense to us as to why this is so low. For the first time ever, we ask employers as well in those same 7 categories, what are the skill levels that you need most? Really, is it that high skill, mid skill, or low skill? And for the first time since we started asking this question, all 7 categories came back being middle skill. Well, that makes us happy at a community college. This is what we do. But what's interesting, again, take a look at IT. This is a little bit of a head scratcher. All of the work that organizations such as LaunchCode that we partner with, NPower, Claim Academy, and this community college that we do in providing people who are IT ready, IT professionals. Access Point is another program that is doing this sort of work. And yet employers are still telling us 43% of the jobs are for those with a 4-year degree or more. And you compare that to patient care, which is hospitals, which are truly our doctors and people in white lab coats. They're saying that there's a higher demand in IT than there is in patient care. And so all of that work, and still it really isn't shifting mindset quite yet. So something else that we have some work to do. One of the things for a community college that's important is to make sure that when our graduates finish with us, we know that they have the skills, but really are they going to be given the opportunity? Many times our students are first-time college or they're career changers. They're not going to have experience in a particular career field. And so we ask those employers, do you have jobs available for those with no experience in your field? Last year we had a little bit of a warning sign because only 36% of employers said, yes, we have jobs for those with no experience. And we're very glad to see that that's kind of spiked back up. We're hoping that was an early pandemic effect, that the trend returns to normal. And this year, over half of the employers said that they had jobs available to those with no experience, which is good to see. We ask employers as well, what sort of jobs do you have at various, or do you have jobs at various education levels? So do you have jobs for those with low skill education, middle skill, high skill? You can see here that the low skill is increased a bit, as I talked about before, potentially in different industries that are hiring and in demand. Middle skill, the highest response that we've seen at 71%. And yet we do see also a continuing climb up for those employers who say that they have jobs available for high skill, 4-year degree and above. So it's just something that we'll continue to track that trend as well. Selfishly, for my department that does accelerated training, we also are very interested in if employers have jobs available for those who have short-term training. We define that very closely or very clearly as after high school, but up to 6 months of accelerated training. And we were glad to see that this year we've got the best result since we started asking this question back in 2019, that 78%, over 3/4 of employers, have jobs available to those with short-term training. And so that's a good point to see. We'll talk about that in a little bit. One of the other things that we've been focused on for the last probably 7 years or so is barriers. And really taking a look, especially as we have a conversation in a bit about bringing more people into the workforce that are already here in our region, what barriers might they be facing? And we had this conversation in detail starting in 2019, taking a look at things like criminal background checks and seeing, is the ban the box effort working? Are we able to get more people into the workforce who might be justice involved? I'm going to show you another slide about that in just a minute. But we do see that many of those barriers are still in place. Almost 3/4 of companies do run criminal background checks for at least some of their jobs. You can see here drug screenings, about half of the companies, our employers are doing that, and so on. So still maybe some of those barriers to getting into the workforce through those checks. Justice-involved individuals is one, again, we took a deep dive on in 2019. We had some remarkable results back in 2019 that unfortunately appears to be a little bit of a data blip for us. And that year we had no employers almost, we had just a very few, that said they wouldn't consider someone who was justice involved for a position. Justice involved is someone who has a felony conviction but has completed their sentence and their probation. And so we see that that's returned this year to about the norm of about 1/5 of employers saying they wouldn't consider someone at all. The positive news that we'll see here is that we've seen the highest level of response for those who would consider a justice-involved individual for any job they were qualified for. So again, something that we're going to continue to monitor and hope that we see that number continue to climb. And finally, I want to talk a little bit about some of the future questions we ask. We ask employers really take a look ahead and what are you thinking about in terms of your workforce initiatives and some other things that you're doing. What we saw as the beginning of a trend last year was resiliency, a real focus on keeping your employees, making sure that you were cross-training, making sure that you had some succession planning. And we saw that really doubled down on this year. Every category here increased. So cross-training and knowledge transfer up 30%. Taking care of your employees up over 30%. Taking a look at technology investments, flexible working, succession planning. Everything increased this year, in many cases significantly, except for one, which is remote working. And that one has us scratching our head as well, because we asked employers a year ago, do you have remote employees working? And we saw almost 2/3, 61% said yes. We asked again this year, and we got a result, only 23%, 22.9% said they had remote employees. Pandemic's still going on, and that was a little bit of a head scratcher for us. But again, a reminder that this is primarily a small and mid-sized business survey, so you have a lot of companies that may not have the technology support or may really just be so customer-facing that they have to be there in person. The other thing was when this survey was in the field, which was before Delta started, and we're feeling a little bit better about where we were with the pandemic. So those may have certainly been factors. But you also take a look at the expected change. Even with those companies who have remote workers, much less than we saw in years past, 40% were going to decrease and only 10% going to increase. So I said before in our report, the death of the office may be a little premature. I think some things are going to change, as Chuck and others have talked about, but it was an interesting result that we're going to continue to track even after the pandemic ends. And then finally, I want to talk about employer concerns. So we ask employers on that 5-point scale again, what are you concerned about? And it was interesting to see that the top of this chart and the top of the responses, the most important things are, again, talent, number one, but then you start seeing some normal business cycle things, financial impacts, supply chain disruptions, employee health issues, and recession. Now, these all can be COVID-related, but they really are normal business cycle issues as well. And you can see it isn't until about 7 or 8 on this list that companies say employee concerns about COVID, customer concerns about COVID, like that COVID comes into this chart late. What we're taking away from this is that employers have figured out how to navigate this pandemic. They're worried about doing business. They're not worried as much about the pandemic because they're doing it. I'd note here that this is the survivors. Just by definition of how we do our survey, we're only interviewing and talking to those companies that are still operating at this point. So these are the people who have figured it out, and that obviously is going to affect this response. But I was still surprised to see COVID so low. So just to sum up a bit, really we are in some pretty exciting times in terms of workforce. We see that almost 2/3 of employers are looking to hire. For a community college, we're very glad to see that middle skill jobs are in demand, and that we also see that employers are willing to get people in the door very quickly, because it's important for our students and for many students, especially as we have our discussion in a minute, they have to be able to work while they're in college, and they have to get into work right away because they need to put food on the table. And so that's a very key piece. One of the things that we want to do is to talk about our recovery. We talked about the opportunities that are there, the fact that we have growth, slow growth. And so we really, really need to be focusing on bringing more people to the table, bringing a more equitable recovery and equitable growth for the future. So really, thank you for your time. I'm going to turn it back over now to our Chancellor, Dr. Jeff Pittman, who will lead our panel. Thanks.
All right, good morning once again. I'm glad to be back and very honored to be here today with the panels that we have. We just have an absolutely fantastic panel of experts. And again, the theme for this panel is equitable recovery, opportunity, and growth, the private sector's role. And I'll quickly introduce our panelists who are here today. First is Marilyn Bush. Marilyn is the president, Bank of America, St. Louis. Welcome. Dr. Art McCoy is the SDL Works Leader for the Regional Business Council. Welcome, Art. It's great to see you. Jim Carrington, President, Donald Danforth Plant Science Center. Jim, it's good to see you again. And then Valerie Patton, Chief Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Officer, Greater St. Louis, Inc. Val, it's a pleasure to have you here today. And again, really looking forward to hearing from these experts, and we'll go in round-robin order here. We have some questions that we're very interested in gaining your expertise from. And then the audience has the ability to ask questions, I understand, on Facebook, and as time allows, we'll go to audience questions. But to set the stage here for the panelists, as you've just heard, we've been through a remarkable 18 months of this pandemic. And despite all the problems caused by COVID, our employers tell us they think the economy is strong and they are ready to hire. We also know that many of our friends and neighbors, especially women and people of color, have been disproportionately impacted by the pandemic. Many of them were left behind during the last decade of growth, and they are even more behind because of COVID. I'd like to talk about how your organizations are ensuring we have an equitable recovery. What are you doing, and why does it make good business sense? So Marilyn, Bank of America, we'll start with you. Bank of America is investing a lot of money, $1 billion, billion with a B, in a nationwide program to help communities address economic and racial inequality accelerated by the global pandemic. Why is the bank making this investment now? This is a two-part question. Why is the bank making this investment now? And what change do you hope to see here in St. Louis?
Yeah, great. First, Dr. Pittman, thanks for having me. You're right. The first thing that I want to say is Bank of America has been investing in the community prior to the last year. But here's what really changed. With the onset of George Floyd and the situation that ensued, Bank of America came out with a $1 billion investment that was very focused on racial equity and working to eliminate racism. And I think it's important to note that that was specifically for individuals and communities of color. Because as you mentioned, that was an area of great disparity. And right here in St. Louis, we made a $1 million investment as part of that $1 billion in St. Louis Community College. Why? Because education is truly the path to prosperity. A good paying job creates career advancement, can change lives, and really, want impact not only an individual, but their family and for generations to come. So we feel like investing in people at this point in time is so important, and giving them the opportunity, whether it's education or credentialing, those opportunities to skill up, to get those good paying jobs. So what would I like to see changed? I would love to be able to see our underserved communities, every individual, have an opportunity to attain the resources that they need for education and to remove the barriers so that they can achieve a good paying job and an opportunity to really impact their lives. And it's lofty, but I think it's also attainable. I think one of my favorite examples is the St. Louis Community College Tech Academy. And I'm going to turn to my good friend, Dr. Art McCoy, to share this story, because I think it's a really great way that employers and education are coming together to identify students with job opportunities on the end that are going to create a pathway for these students to see career possibilities and have jobs waiting for them on the end. So Art, if you want to share a little bit about that.
Sure. We were so pleased when we saw the great donation from this fabulous leader, Marilyn Bush, and the organization that she represents. that we knew that we could connect the students to this money. So I believe that talent is equally distributed, but access to opportunities are not. So Access Point was created out of that to grant access to students with talent to make sure that they had living wage jobs and beyond after receiving some technical education from the fine institution of St. Louis Community College. And within months, thanks to Daugherty Business Solution, thanks to Bank of America, and to St. Louis Community College, we had over 30 students enrolled, going through a 3-month course, and now fully employed at Evernorth Cigna. It wouldn't have been possible without leadership like this.
Thanks. And I want to encourage, as we go through, if the other panelists would like to engage in the question or the conversation, please feel free to do so. We want this to be a conversational panel and event. Okay, Dr. McCoy, I'll turn to you with the next question. And I think everybody or many people in our community know Dr. McCoy. He served in various leadership roles in a lot of things. Most recently, you were in superintendent at Jennings High School, and he's now rolling up his sleeves and getting engaged in our community and doing whatever he can to get the word out about all the opportunities and assist people get into those opportunities. Well, Art, we made reference to the collaboration that needs to take place across community organizations, employers, and educators to help connect this pathway to employment for individuals. Tell us a bit about STL Works. How does it make those connections?
Well, thank you for having us, and I want to say congratulations to Community College on passing its last bond issue, which is fabulous. We are pleased to be partners with you as the Regional Business Council, and Kathy Osborne and I have been great supporters, and we're just really pleased with your leadership. Dr. Pittman, you've been a champion in the community. We're so pleased to have you. So STL Works is an organization and an effort, an initiative that promotes and produces stars. We want to get St. Louis to work through making sure that you see our star companies, our star leaders, many of whom are on this panel, as well as our star St. Louisans who can get into jobs. They have high will and sometimes varying skills, but we ultimately want to let them know that organizations, over 100 RBC organizations are here to partner with them. Over 20 new nonprofits, as well as government organizations are here to make sure that we make St. Louis a shining star. So STAR is an acronym for me that stands for supporting over 1,000 jobs in each sector that we support. We have about 5 sectors, that being healthcare, which is a #1 need, technology, which is a huge need, advanced manufacturing, trades, and public safety. As we speak right now, over 30 students are with fire chiefs, police chiefs, and the Missouri Public Safety Department at Kemp SBRF and at Beaumont, learning how to be first responders, doing CPR training, and they're high schoolers because we're creating a talent pipeline that we're supporting. That's the T in STARS. We are transforming education to create a talent pipeline that didn't exist to make it more robust. We've had many organizations that have pipelines, but we're making it more robust than ever before, including communities of color like never before. Because ultimately, as a career-long educator, I know that education is the great equalizer, but it is opportunities that becomes an equity supersizer. So we need opportunities along with education. The A stands for accessing those opportunities, just like Access Point and like the many other programs that we support, Empower, the Urban League, Save Our Sons and Save Our Sisters, and Wrong for Women, which is another partner of ours. Those are all points of access so that you can have a viable, thriving future. And then the R is for recruitment, making sure that people know that if you want to get into a job, get in, and then there is tuition reimbursement and recruitment strategies with mentors that will follow you until you get into that corporate management type role. So we want to take students and mentor them and give them tuition reimbursement so that they don't have college debt, so that they can have this thriving future. And lastly, the S is showcasing our success. So we have tons of articles. We've been on every TV outlet talking about workforce development and specials on Post of St. Louis and beyond, and the St. Louis Business Journal, the St. Louis American. We do monthly articles there. And that ultimately is the methodology of putting St. Louis to work in a special way. That's called STL Works, with over 120 partners and corporations saying we are in and we're going to invest in Black-led organizations, diverse communities, and all people who are high-will and want to improve their skills.
All right. Well, thanks you, Art. Kathy picked the right person in the St. Louis region to head up this effort. Art has tremendous enthusiasm, and I realize, you know, working in higher education, you can provide all the opportunities, low-cost access, but you have to get people engaged and interested. I mean, we have the population and we have the people, but it's getting them aligned and create the opportunities and the examples they can set for their entire families. Being in the business as long as I have, I can't tell you all the times where I've seen 1 degree in a family break a cycle of poverty for that entire family going forward. So what you're doing is incredibly important, Art, and keep going with that. All right, next up, Jim Carrington from the Danforth Plant Science Center. I was really glad to hear Amy, 9 PBS, the #1 PBS in the nation, and we have right here in St. Louis the #1 plant science startup center in the world. And Jim Carrington's leading that. So Jim, you represent an industry cluster that is viewed as one of St. Louis's current strengths and one that has huge potential for continued growth. One of the Danforth Plant Science Center's core values says, diversity and inclusion strengthen our community. We actively welcome diverse people, cultures, and perspectives. We strive to provide an environment in which everybody feels comfortable and excels. You've noted that your core values leave no room for racial disparity. So again, here's a 2-part question for you. What is the plant science and biotechnology sector doing to reach those who haven't traditionally been able to access careers in these fields? And also, has the pandemic changed your ability to do that?
Well, first, thank you so much for inviting me. I'm honored to be on this panel with great leaders from St. Louis, and thank you for all that you're doing at the community college. It's a great honor to partner with you, as I think everyone's going to mention their partnerships with the community college as we go along, and we're certainly right there with everybody else. This is, your first question is really complicated. What is the industry, the ag tech or the plant science and bioscience industries doing? The reason that's such a complicated question is because no one organization owns racial disparity. And what makes it even more complicated, despite the fact that I think certainly most, probably every organization realizes that there are problems to address and challenges to meet, they're not all contributing to the same level. So it's a complicated thing. Now, St. Louis has some advantages in the life sciences. We have a community that started, 20 years or so ago. It's organized around an organization called BioSTL, and community leaders like Bill Danforth, when he was with us, and John McDonnell have led in efforts to consolidate all participants who are willing to participate in addressing these community-wide issues. And so I'm proud that we're a part of it. I'm proud that effort, time, resources are being devoted to training, to understanding best practices, not just from within the region, but from outside the region to address these. Now, the organizations, in my opinion, that are doing a good job reducing racial disparities are the ones that are productively partnering with the community college. We're thrilled to have a long-standing partnership with the Center for Plant and Life Sciences. They do 2 really important things to help grow a diverse community in the life sciences. Number 1, they train students, community college students, incredibly productively. They all get jobs. I shouldn't say they all get jobs. Some go on to get 4-year degrees after that, but they are all employable and providing an essential workforce to a growing life science community, including the community around the Danforth Center. Other partnerships on pipeline development, as Art mentioned, we work with the Jackie Joyner Kersey Foundation, centered around a program of urban agriculture, but it's really a pipeline, pre-college pipeline that identifies students, puts them in a pipeline for the University of Illinois. This is in East St. Louis. We're very honored to be a part of that. Last set of things to mention is what are we doing at the Danforth Center? And this is kind of a theme that I believe in. That is, if we don't own the whole problem, the question we should all be asking is, what can we do? What part of it do we own, and where can we move to? And there's two parts of that. We just completed our strategic plan a few months ago. And our number one priority was to make the Danforth Center a more diverse, equitable, and inclusive organization. And that involves a lot of things, but we reconstructed our whole people strategy around how do we, not just setting a goal of how do we hire more diverse individuals, but what are we doing to identify a more diverse pool? You know, this is really in my opinion, the crux of hiring is expanding the pool of diverse students. Because we have a problem in the life sciences, that is, the pipeline is very thin with people of color. So if you have to hire from a pool that has a deficit of people of color, what do you do? So we thought long and hard about that and figured out ways to go deeper and to go wider. Go deeper and identify those candidates who we might have overlooked in the past because maybe they didn't achieve as much on paper as someone who had the advantages, but they achieved disproportionately relative to the environment they were in and the resources they were afforded. And going wider is really about expanding the definition of what a plant scientist is and going into those fields that do have more diverse individuals who are willing to come into our space. That's really important. The second and the last thing, I'll leave it with this, is part of our strategic plan also identified ways to reach out better to the community and help fill that pipeline better. Again, what can we do uniquely to help that? Well, we're a science organization. We do scientific research, and we hired a director of science, director of education research and outreach. Not just a director of outreach or a director of education, but we wanted someone who could learn what it was that was what the barriers were for people entering the pipeline, and then what were the barriers to moving them through the pipeline, and what could we do to make those things happen more productively. And so we are studying this. We publish papers on this in scientific journals, and we participate in programs that give students actual experiences being a scientist, because that's one of the things that we learned. Students are coming into the pipeline, but they're dropping out of the pipeline. The ones that stay in longer are the ones who identify themselves as a scientist or as a member of the STEM or the STEAM community. And that is, there's two really important parts there. One, giving them experiences where they can answer the question, what am I? I'm a scientist. And two, where they can see people that look like them who are not only participating but succeeding.
All right, thanks, Jim. And I know with our biotech programs up at Danforth, a lot of the students will tell you kind of the same story, that when they first thought about biotechnology, going into that program as a career, it was just too scary. They go, oh, that's science, it's way too hard. But when they get engaged, they're, well, I can do this. And I think that those peer models are so important for students. When they see individuals that look like them succeeding and getting into jobs, and oftentimes we bring graduates back in, many of them are working at the Danforth Plant Science Center and startup companies, to get those, just to hear those stories, really helps encourage individuals getting into that area.
Because this is a conversation, I just want to throw the data point. Out of all the 100% of African Americans that are at St. Louis Community College or in colleges, only 6% of them finish in 3 years. So it highlights the point that some people stop out for many reasons. But when you have relationships with people that are champions, like my dear friend Val Patton, who has leadership organizations that has champions in thousands of corporations, it helps people to stay connected. That's what we got to do in a mighty way. And I would be pleased to partner with you as well to help on that in that regard.
That's a great point, Art. You know what we've learned the last few years while I've been in St. Louis at the college is just those personal connections. We have some college-bound staff at the Forest Park campus that work with St. Louis Public School graduates, and it's not complicated. I mean, they're not doing complicated work, but the students that they track, the completion rates are very high. And I think it's just because the students stop in and talk to the staff every day, and just having those alignments, you wouldn't think would be that powerful, but it really, really is. Just spending a little time and paying attention to folks really goes a long ways in higher ed. All right, Valerie, it's just a pleasure to have you here today as well. And you probably don't even know when I first met you. I remember I met you, I think, at a regional chamber meeting, and you spoke, and you're kind of soft-spoken, but I thought, boy, you really got my attention with the words that you say. You present a very powerful message, and we appreciate you, being in the State of the St. Louis Workforce Report this year, and did a great job with that. So the question for you. Val, the narrative section of this year's State of the St. Louis Workforce Report was a discussion around the STL 2030 jobs plan released earlier this year. We continue to see inequities for Black and brown people, low-wage workers, and women. One of the many important aspects of the report was to clearly define quality jobs as paying 80% or more of the national median salary, which is approximately $40,000 today. What are the steps leaders in our region can take today to raise the floor to create these quality jobs?
First, let me say thank you, Dr. Pittman, Hart Nelson, and the St. Louis Community College staff for having me today. Good to be here with my esteemed panelists this morning. Thank you, 9 PBS, for hosting us this morning. So as we begin to look at what can we do to be very solution focused, we have many things that are going on within our region today. So we have the $1 million commitment from Bank of America. We have the work of STL Works and other workforce development initiatives from the Regional Business Council. We partner with organizations like BioSTL, which actually started at the St. Louis Regional Chamber some years ago, to begin to open up opportunities in the biosciences, ag tech arena. We have, on May the 5th of this year, released at Greater St. Louis, Inc., the STL 2030 Jobs Plan, which is around equitable, inclusive growth in our region over the next 10 years. So as we specifically pull out the piece on being a talent magnet, it takes everybody. So the African proverb, it takes a village. Another African proverb, I am because we are. and because we are, I am. So it will take everyone. It will take business. It will take community. It will take organizations to make sure that we realize that everyone has access and equitable equality to opportunity, period. So that means resources. We have to open up the resources for all. Yes, we have some historical issues here that we must confront in our region. But as we begin to confront them, know that if one part is not doing well, we're all not doing well. So it's not just, okay, this group of individuals have the resources, the opportunity, the access to education, or to health care, or to transportation. Everybody has to have those so they can get to those hundreds of jobs that we have open every day, that they can get to the Florissant Valley campus of the St. Louis Community College to get the training that is offered in conjunction with Boeing to work in the aerospace industry. So we need everyone participating and really seeing the value. Yes, it does go back to our capitalist society that we do need to have money to be able to build wealth. But to some of the earlier points, yes, education opens up many doors. The further you go, the more doors will be open to you. So we need to make sure that we have in place and we have recognized and we have plans that are sustainable and implementable, that we can really look forward to making sure if I want to work in healthcare, everything I need will be provided to me. A very key point that was made earlier is our focus and concentration needs to be on the 5 to 34-year-olds. So that means education, experiences, exposures need to start very young. And that means if you have, I was a science and math kid, and I still love science and math. I'm a recovering accountant and information technologist. But because I was exposed and had educational opportunities, I was able to realize many of those dreams. It may be something as simple as a field trip to the butterfly house, to be able to see what butterflies eat, what they do, and how they do it. So to really realize this, we have to recognize we all play a part. Is it speaking to a class of students? Is it accepting teachers into your work environment so they can learn the new processes? Is it a new looking at our systems and our policies and to see how they need to be updated and reviewed? And our curriculums, and the list goes on and on. So all of that to say, it takes all of us to realize that we will be able to create the quality jobs needed in our region to make sure that everybody has access to them.
All right. Thanks, Val. That's terrific. And I go back to Amy's earlier comment when Amy Shaw spoke about combining our resources. I mean, really, in so many ways, the St. Louis region is blessed with a lot of resources. And we just need to make sure that we're collectively moving in the right direction. Jim, you talked about your strategic plan, having the diversity, equity, and inclusive element. I know at the college, out of the 4 strategic initiatives we have, that's one of them. So that's 25%. I just think that all of that You know, and I certainly won't go bore you with the details of all the aspects of what's under that initiative, but all of that is incredibly important. And what some of the touch points that we're hitting on today that's really getting into my heart is just taking the time and energy, sharing resources, and just helping people get into these pathways. Because if we don't do that, they may not have any other opportunity. They may not have had the family that I had growing up or parents that were there to support me in the way that they did. And the number one reason so many students may stop out is usually family, life, or financial issues, where they just don't have that support mechanism at home that oftentimes we have to step up and assist with. So thanks, Val. Very well said. All right, Marilyn, back to you. We have a lot of employers and workforce development professionals viewing our event today. What are the missing tools in our regional toolbox that other community partners could bring to the table to support efforts like the Bank of America's? Where do we have gaps and where are we falling short?
Yeah, I'll tell you, great question. I think we've talked about it on this panel already, is the collaboration, really the coming together, the education. And it starts grade school, high school, college, and bringing those students closer to the employers, to the career opportunities that exist. I always say you can't accomplish it if you can't dream it. And if you don't necessarily know what the possibilities are, then we will cease to exist and advance. And so, as Valerie said, opening as employers, opening your doors to, showcase kind of what it's like, whether it's to be in a manufacturing plant, making planes, or going into the classroom to talk about what an education or what an opportunity in financial services looks like. How can we create those mentorships? Really creating that collaboration all the way through, I think, is so important out of the gate. And then for employers to have those jobs that are available on the back end of all of this mentorship and really kind of creating the opportunity for education and employers to come together, educating those students. I think it's also important too, we've got great intermediaries like Dr. Art McCoy and what he's doing to really marry the two up. And it's just done phenomenal work along with folks like the Urban League. So again, I think it's that collaboration. It's employers owning the problem or the situation, the opportunity. Let's not call it a problem. Let's call it the opportunity to bring more students into the fold of what their career possibilities could look like. And then I think really delivering on that with the jobs on the back end. And as I also think about it too, a day in the life for me is really once we bring these students and new associates into our organization at Bank of America, especially in St. Louis, how am I going to help them advance? Do we have mentor programs internally? Do we have an emerging leaders program? Are we really having our leaders connect with those individuals to help them as they grow in their career path? And to me, it's really having that heart and it's not just programs, but really the culture of helping to bring up our next generation of workforce. And to me, I think those are the things that we really need to own. And I think Dr. Carrington said it best. Every employer needs to own this opportunity.
Thanks, Marilyn. Yeah, I agree. And, one of the more shocking statistics of our workforce report this year is the percentage of people that are 55 and older. Me being one contributing to that statistic, that 25% of our workforce is 55 or older, and we've got to embrace it. I mean, it's scary, as we mature, at least in my case, hoping I'm maturing in the right way. Succession planning starts really popping into your head of who's going to be next and how do we get them ready. I mean, really, that's the same view across on all of our workforce issues in St. Louis and across the country right now, is just kind of bringing those people into the fold. So, yeah, good observation, and we certainly have our work cut out for us, but it's just different than what business as usual was even 5 years ago. Okay, Art. Next. You've talked for years about the value of so-called power skills. I love power skills. The first time I heard it, Art said it. That young people get hired on the hard skills and fired on the soft skills. Our report this year backs that up once again. 65% of employers reported job applicants with poor work habits, and over half cited lack of communication and interpersonal skills. How does an equitable recovery address this power skills gap?
It's a great question. That's a great question. So, I'm so pleased to be here again. It was under Amy Shaw's leadership with the 9 Network that I rolled out the term power skills here in the region. And it is the power skills that we need and that we want. I want to also dovetail on what Marilyn shared and what Jim and Val shared. See, I don't call it diversity, inclusion, and equity. I call it diversity, equity, diversity, inclusion, and equity. So I switched the E and the I because, frankly, we have to define what equity is. Most people talk about it. I define equity as meeting the need at the speed of the need. That's number one. And there's a lot of people who need to know how to have power, how to have the power to get a job, keep a job, get a promotion, and have not just a livable wage, but a thriving wage for life. Secondly, I call it DIE because if we don't do this, we die as a community. DEI, what does that mean? We don't know, but we know what dying means. We know what being the murder capital of the United States means in St. Louis. We know that there's death. We know about Michael Brown, who was my student when I was the first African-American superintendent of Ferguson, Florissant, 14,000 students at that time, and then became the superintendent of Jennings. We die if we don't have diversity, inclusion, and equity, but we want to promote life. We need organizations that promote life. Leaders like the ones that you see here and many others, leaders who are instituting a future of equity. That's life. Leaders instituting a future of equity. What is equity? Meeting the needs, the speed of the need. Also, I quote equity as being what love looks like in public amongst strangers. My good friend Carnell West said justice is what love looks like. I told him and texted him, I said, equity is what love looks like in public amongst strangers. What we need is corporations who are strangers to communities that are dying to say we love you by making a job available, allowing $1 billion of resources to be pushed into the communities to ultimately change the trajectory of their lives. Those are the actions. And you see other organizations like MasterCard who committed to $500 million, Target $200 million, Walgreens $100 million, taking their entry-level employees, custodians and others, and saying, we'll give you an associate's degree to become a market technologist, a marketing person, or something else. The point is, those are the actions that distribute power. And so it's soft if you already make $200,000 a year. You know, it's soft to come to your dinner table and say, oh, yeah, we showed up on time, we dressed like this, and we ate some good food. It's power when you don't have it, and it's power that we need to give to others for empowerment, because it does take a village, not only to raise a child, but to do what we're talking about. But the rest of that proverb, when I went to Kenya, was this: if the village is crazy, so will your children be. So make sure the village is well. Be well so that you can have power and have everybody be well. That was straight from Kenya, my Maasai warriors. And that's what we're doing. And we have over 30 school districts as a part of the STL Works partner. I mean, being a 22-year administrator and superintendent myself, I just emailed them and texted them and said, hey guys, get these teachers to this location, not only to just bridge in a way of having speakers come to them, because we have our speakers network with STL Works, but we have teacher externships, meaning the teachers go to the corporations. Thanks to some of the work that Val Patton did a long time ago with another good friend, Deborah Patterson, at the very beginning, she was the first to start that teacher externship notion in 2010, which I was a part of. And we have now grown it through Missouri Careers, Show Me Careers, to have it be a system where we have over 100 teachers going to corporations, RBC corporations, and learning, and then making lessons in elementary schools, middle schools, and high schools to make the power transfer.
All right. That's terrific, Art. Those are incredibly important programs, and making those connections are things we certainly need to keep pushing forward within the future. Jim, the STL 2030 Jobs Plan talks about building talent pipeline support And one of the authors, Bruce Katz, cited examples he witnessed in states able to transition from bespoke small partnerships to cluster-led, company-led partnerships. Looking beyond plant science, what do you see as St. Louis's standout industry opportunities over the longer term?
Well, when you ask me that question, I'm in I don't know if I'm in an unusual situation or, I'm in my own situation where I'm at a nonprofit. And by definition, we're not going about our work trying to make a buck more than we spend. And so that affords us the luxury of asking, what can we do that, in our case at the Danforth Center, where we have a part of our vision and part of our mission is to help see St. Louis grow. But we have the luxury beyond that part of our mission to say what's good more broadly. And so when we look at industries and opportunities for economic growth that are really interesting, again, this is our perspective, we're looking for a twofer. We're looking not only for economic growth, economic opportunity in the region, but we're looking for things that will make the planet and the world a better place. The Danforth Center has a mission to improve the human condition through plant science. That's really broad and it's really freeing in the sense of what can we do to help a lot of people. And so we distill that down to food, the environment, and helping St. Louis. So some of those, back to your question, what's really interesting to us are the things that are at the intersection of plant science and other things that we're good at. Geospatial, for example. A lot of people who don't come from a plant science or an ag background might not realize that everything that happens in agriculture now involves geospatial. Think in terms of mapping every square foot of soil that is cultivated. And not just mapping it, where is it, but mapping the composition. How much nitrogen is in that soil? How much water does that soil hold? How much rainfall hits that soil? And on and on and on. There's 1,000 different things to measure and associate with every square foot of soil. That influences everything that a farmer does or a grower does. And an entire collection of industries has been transformed because of that marriage between agriculture and geo. Well, as I think everyone listening appreciates, St. Louis is a growing powerhouse in geospatial. And we ought to be the world leader in 5-10 years with the amount of investment that's coming in, not just from the government, but from the private sector. Other areas, getting maybe not quite to your question, it's a little closer to home to plant science. We're really excited about the opportunities that are being created around the Danforth Center in our innovation community in 39 North. We're proud to anchor that community, again, because we have the freedom to make investments that are very long-term that solve this twofer, economic growth and important problems. So we're excited to see companies like Benson Hill invent the new technologies around plant-based protein, which, on its own, unless you're a vegetarian, doesn't really solve a problem until you take one step back and realize that plant-based protein is one of the primary routes to solve climate change. How does that happen? Well, if we can reduce the amount of animal-based or animal consumption, which is a huge driver of greenhouse gases and climate change, we can do something good for the world. Plant-based proteins is one route to contribute to solving that challenge. We have a company that's growing in 39 North called Pivot Bio. They're inventing new microbial solutions to solve the fertilizer problem. Well, some on this panel know all about the fertilizer problem. We're putting not only expensive, but greenhouse gas emitting and polluting fertilizers on our agricultural soils. And can we get back to nature? Microbes that live in nature, that naturally feed plants, can be used in agriculture, but it's a technological series of solutions that need to be developed and then implemented. And that's where the innovation community around the Danforth Center is doing so much good work. And if we do this really well, working on these big global challenges, if we do that well, and if we do it according to the mission that we were set out to achieve when we were founded 23 years ago, the economy of the St. Louis region cannot help but grow. And if we do it especially well, it will grow in a more diverse and inclusive way.
I know our time is winding up, but I would be remiss if I didn't say, as a distinguished scholar and fellow of St. Louis University working on the Geospatial Institute, National Geospatial Institute, thanks to Tom Hillman, who helped to create the organization 25 years ago and fundraise for it. You know, my specific role within that, and I know Val Hatton has the same goal with the NGA project, is to make sure that communities of color get access to the jobs and opportunities in this diverse field, knowing that we will be the worldwide, and we are the worldwide hub of ag and geospatial. So many African Americans and Latinos have no clue. So we have to get them into your organization by the droves and get them into the NGA, which 95% of those jobs are going to come from the East Coast, from Washington, D.C. But the National Center for Location Science, to do the work as contractors towards the geospatial, will be us right here, to your point. So I just wanted to make people who are watching know, reach out to people like Jim and to people like Val and myself and Valerie to say, hey, how, and to my friend, Ms. Marilyn Bush, to say, how can we get those jobs? Because it's here. And it's a secret, and you have access to that power. So I just couldn't go without saying that.
You mentioned Tom Hillman, who is a good friend of the Danforth Center and one of the very important investors in companies in 39 North.
Yes, that's true.
Tom understands that there is great value not only in investing in promising companies, but investing in companies that can solve big problems.
That's very true.
Every investor I talk to feels the same way.
Exactly right.
Right, well, let's keep going on this talent concept, and we'll wrap up here about out of time, but we got time for one more question for our panelists. And Val, as you pointed out in the narrative of our State of the St. Louis Workforce Report, the talent is right here. Experience and exposure are everything. From your perspective, what are some of the ways to provide the experience and exposure to the talent of our own region, and what tools are we lacking today?
I don't know that we are lacking any tools. I really don't. I think we need to know who's doing what best, and then from there, we can categorize to be able to put and send people in the right direction. So above and beyond that, collaboration, partnership, supporting the best of the best that we have, when we've mentioned a lot of those organizations today, to make sure that they are funded properly, to make sure that they have the resources that they need, that will allow them to grow, to serve more people. Talked a little bit earlier around experience and exposures, you know, making sure that we reinstitute field trips, that we put arts back into the schools, that we, provide teachers opportunities, provide students opportunities to look at our practices and policies. You know, there is word bias in job descriptions. So how do we recognize that, move past that?
I had a couple of audience questions here I'll ask for panelists here. Here's the first one. Do you think people will continue moving to the Midwest from high-cost coastal regions?
They're coming and stealing our jobs and our people. And they're trying to actually take places. Amazon is the largest employer of St. Charles County today. And so that's a Seattle company. They've moved in, bought real estate, and have hired most of the people. The answer is yes to the West Coast company. I was a superintendent in Irvine, a superintendent resident in Irvine, California for 2 years, right after leaving Ferguson. And their strategy is to bring business here and then to steal people and to take them there. The key is to keep the talent here because young people want to go to West Coast, to Austin, Texas, and other places. Those are the #1 cities. We ultimately need to let them know that a thriving life is here with real recruitment partners and mentors that are committed towards allowing you to be paid enough to go vacation there and then bring your resources and your family back here. So, but yes, that's happening, and it's going to continue to happen. But we can be the Silicon Valley of the Midwest, in St. Louis, as my friend David Stewart likes to say. And we are because we have technology leaders right here on this panel even. So. We need to just stay strong and keep it strong in St. Louis.
All right, thanks, Art. Yeah, I think I agree. We have the tools here and we have the infrastructure here. We just need to keep building on it, but the cost of living here is just fantastic and is a big attraction as well. Well, here, one more question for you. Are brick and mortar jobs, other than the service industry, a thing of the past?
No.
I don't think so either. I think the report showed that not really that many companies are expecting to have remote work going forward. I think only about 20% stated that they were using remote workers right now. So that's an interesting question. I know people think about that. Yes, Val?
So it goes back to our conversation pre-panel today that I think we'll always have to go into the doctor's office and get a shot. I don't think that will be something that we will be able to do on the screen with the doctor in telemedicine. So I think there will always be jobs that will have to be housed, like an MRI. A lot in the healthcare field, but also a lot in the technology field too. Because though we are sitting here today in front of this camera, all of this had servers associated with it and wires and technology. So there will be jobs that will be brick and mortar, and then there are some things that have very easily transitioned to a remote environment. So we will be more hybrid, I think, as we move forward.
Just look at what it takes today to create and to manufacture and distribute the Pfizer COVID vaccine. I think that's a really good example not only of what St. Louis can do, because we're a major piece of that, but also this new is bricks and mortar, is going to work a thing of the past? No, it's more integrated with knowledge. If you're a computer programmer, you probably don't have to come into work. Of course, we all understand that. But if you're manufacturing hundreds of pounds of plasmid DNA, which is the starting point for the Pfizer and the Moderna vaccine, which is done right out here in Chesterfield in the Pfizer facility, you need a big facility that's big, clean, and that has talented workers working at the tanks, at the bench, at the machines. You can't get away with it. By the way, that DNA goes to Maryland, to another factory, where a bunch of really qualified and talented people turn it into something else, and then it gets shipped to Kalamazoo, Michigan, where another factory gets a hold of it with talented people, ultimately put it in a vial and ship it out to all of those clinics that Valerie just mentioned to give the shot. I think I think some people might want you to think that bricks and mortar are a thing in the past, but I don't think that's the world we live in yet, and I don't think it'll be the world we live in next year either.
Yeah, I would agree with Jim. At Bank of America, we're a work from the office environment, and we've been talking about it a lot. Collaboration is key, and this doesn't necessarily happen if we're all working remotely. I do think that there's probably some hybrid that comes as a result of what we've experienced, because we know that it can work, but it's probably not the most ideal situation.
Well, an educator, I couldn't agree more. we need to develop those social skills and power skills along with everything else that we're teaching and students are learning. Well, I want to thank the panelists for their time. I really enjoyed the event today and really enjoyed this panel, not only for your time today, but just what you're doing for St. Louis. Working collectively to make this a better place for the people that live here and become more attractive for others to come in the future. I want to thank 9 PBS, all of the viewers and the partners that assisted us with us today. And I want to encourage you, if you have not yet, make sure you download the full report at stlcc.edu/STL Workforce. And make sure to take a look at this week's St. Louis Business Journal and look out for the 9 PBS special event airing Monday, November 21st at 7 p.m. on this topic. Thanks so much, everyone. Have a terrific day.